Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, the show where I, the curator, discuss my personal favorite show of all time, personal favorite franchise of all time, Doctor Who. And for those of you who may have noticed, every month that I've done this show so far, we had a theme for the month. And I think that's the way I want these episodes of the episodes of the show to go. So the first episode was mainly just an introduction. We covered the very first episode ever of the show, An Unearthly Child or 100,000 BC, depending on who you ask. We had the most recent episode of the show, The Eve of the Daleks. We had the first episode of Big Finish, for Doctor Who, that is, The Sirens of Time. And then we had just an episode where I just talked and nerded out, I should say, about why I love the show so much and what my favorite things about the show were. For the second month, it was mainly focused around the Doctor and a little bit around the TARDIS. We talked about all of the classic Doctors, the original 7, as I call them. Then we talked in the next week on all the modern era Doctors. Then just any other Doctor that didn't quite fit into any category, like the War Doctor, the Eighth Doctor, the Peter Cushing Doctor, some spoof Doctors, all kinds of different Doctors from various areas of the Doctor Who universe. And then I did a full T-ranking list of all of the Doctors that I like, all the Doctors that I could fit onto a single T-ranking list at that time. And then last month we actually had 5 episodes, mainly because midway through we kind of moved the show from a Wednesday to a Monday to accommodate other shows on this channel. So as a result, I had to kind of last minute scramble to make another episode to fill out the final week of that month, which is when I had guests on in the name of Raiko, the Canadian, and Luke from Galaxy Geeks, where we did a full T-ranking list of all the TARDISes. And then if you were wondering, that's why I was able to make that episode in the first place, because we had to move it to a different date. And I had to fill out one more day in such a way that it didn't interfere with my plan of making each month centered around one specific topic. Now, this month's topic is mostly going to focus on companions. The Doctor Who companions. I have a great plan for this month, but obviously, as you may have already guessed, the first episode of this month, for the first week, will be mostly centered around the classic era companions. And this is just a hilarious, fun picture that I found years ago when I first started watching Doctor Who. And it's all the female companions, minus Barbara for some reason, but it's all the female classic companions saying Doctor. Obviously, Ace says Professor, because that's how she used to refer to him as, and obviously Susan calls him as Grandfather, because obviously she's his granddaughter. That's how she calls him. And then there's Rose just standing there. Oh my God, I thought I was special. And right next to her is K9 saying negative. And I just love the look on the 10th Doctor there. And I really think that the artist was able to capture all the expressions and just the feel of every single one of those female companions. Now, obviously, Doctor Who has had more than just female companions, and we are going to talk about them all throughout this month, as a matter of fact. Now, this is not a T-ranking list of all companions, because we actually did a T-ranking list of all the Doctor Who companions last year. Me and Soda and Ben and Kiwi. We did a 4 hours video of just every single companion minus Dan Bishop, because we haven't gotten around to him, because obviously the Doctor Who Flux hasn't happened yet when we did that video. But it took 4 hours. We ranked every single companion that I felt was necessary, and in my opinion, we still left a lot of details on the table. That was a very long video, and we still could have talked about it more. So what I'm going to do for today is something pretty similar to what I did a couple of weeks ago with episode recommendations for the show. Except this time, I made it a much shorter list and just a list of episodes that I personally think best show off each individual companion. Now, obviously, every single Doctor has what I like to call a signature companion, or rather, the companion that is most iconic and most recognizable for that particular Doctor. So I made a short list of about 50 episodes. I try to keep it to at least 2, maximum 3 episodes per companion, so that we don't actually get another episode like we did last week of an hour and 40-ish minutes. So yeah. However, before we get down to that, there is a couple of things I like to point out before we start. Obviously, at this point, it's kind of tradition, I would say, that I highlight a certain actor or crew member associated with Doctor Who on their birthday. Now, last week, behind the scenes stuff, we pre-taped the episode. Me, Raiko, and Luke. We pre-taped on a Thursday of that week. The following day, however, was actually because that's the main reason why it didn't make it onto the show, because it hadn't happened yet by the time I recorded that. We pre-recorded that episode, so I apologize for that. But the following Thursday, the 25th of the month, that was the birthday of Mrs. Ingrid Oliver, and you can see here in this picture, Ingrid Oliver portrayed the character of Priscilla Osgood in the modern era, Stephen Moffat era, I should say. I believe she first debuted in Day of the Doctor. She then came back in Death in Heaven, Capaldi's first season finale, and then she came back once more in the Zygon two-parter. So I just want to wish happy birthday, or rather much belated happy birthday to Ingrid Oliver, and thank you for playing this character. But not to overshadow that, and I promise I don't mean to do that, but something else that happened this week, and I would argue is the much bigger thing, is on March 1st was another birthday of an actor who could no longer be with us, unfortunately. But again, not to overshadow Ingrid Oliver and the character of Priscilla Osgood, but this actor just is... Words cannot describe his immense contribution to the world of Doctor Who. And it's very sad that he's no longer with us, or rather, that he couldn't contribute to Doctor Who more than he already did. But I am, of course, talking about the one, the only, Mr. Roger Delgado. Most people know him as the first Master. He was the Master during the Jon Pertwee era, and in mine and most other people's opinions, he is the best Master. There is no competition. There is no denying it. All other Masters are not to downgrade any of them. Not to downgrade the Anthony Ainley. Sorry, not to downgrade Peter Pratt, Benjamin. Jeffrey Beavers. I don't know where Benjamin came from. Alex McQueen, Derek Jacobi, Eric Roberts, John Sim, Michelle Gomez, or Sasha Dewan, or any other character, or any other actor, I should say, who has portrayed a version of the Master. But just Roger Delgado is definitively and unarguably, I should say, the best. He set the standard. He is the original template for the Master, and all other Masters are just trying to live up to his name and to his performance. And obviously he was really good friends with Jon Pertwee, the Doctor at the time. And unfortunately, there was an episode that was originally supposed to be planned for the Jon Pertwee era, where it would have been revealed that the Doctor and the Master were at one point brothers, or something close like that. But obviously, that episode concept was scrapped, and got a minute reference in The Sound of Drums, the David Tennant episode. Unfortunately, his career was cut tragically short. He was filming another movie in Turkey in 1973, and he was in a car that accidentally drove off a cliff, and him and all other people in the car perished in the car crash on that very same day. Uh, it was June 18th, 1973. He was 55 when he passed away. He was born in 1918, so theoretically speaking, he would have been 104 if he was still alive today. So obviously, clearly, he probably wouldn't have been around here with us, uh, regardless. But still, it was a death far too soon and a tragic one at that. And we miss him dearly, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I just wanted to take this moment to say happy birthday uh, and thank you, Roger Delgado. Thank you. We quite literally could not do this without you. So, yeah, I think I spent a little too much time on it than I would have liked to. But yeah, like I said, belated happy birthday to, I guess, his remaining family and friends. Belated happy birthday to Mr. Roger Caesar Marius Bernard Delgado Torres Castillo Roberto. And yes, that's his full name. Moving on, hopefully I'm going to try to liven things up a little bit by talking about Doctor Who companions. Now, obviously, like I said, we already mentioned all of them in the Doctor Who companion T ranking list, so I highly recommend you go watch that one. I will ask Sora to link it in the description of this video. But yeah, so starting us off, the very first episode I would like to recommend to people is an episode simply known as Inside the Spaceship or Edge of Destruction. Again, it's one of those episodes where it depends on who you ask with regards to the title of it. But long story short, it's mainly a bottle episode. The Doctor and friends are trapped inside the TARDIS, which is acting weird, and it's starting to affect the people inside it, the companions and the Doctor mainly. But it's a great showcase of how the first Doctor and his companions did not quite get along at first. They didn't quite see eye to eye most of the time, but I would argue it's a really good episode that really showcases just how great the character of Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright are. I would even argue Barbara more than Ian in this episode because she actually manages to figure out certain things that even the Doctor was overlooking in this episode. So I would highly recommend watching that. Another episode that heavily focuses on Barbara is the episode The Aztecs. As you can see here, they land in an old Aztec city, and Barbara is mistaken for a Aztec goddess. And it's an episode about should people from the future impersonate deities, which is something slightly like what C-3PO said his programming prevents him from doing in Star Wars The Return of the Jedi. It's a great conflict episode between the Doctor and Barbara, and I would even argue that Ian has a lot of great moments in this episode as well. It's one of my favorites of that era, and just all of William Hartnell's first season, I just love it. There's only one flaw in it, which we'll get to in a later episode, I would imagine. Now, I didn't want to leave out Susan. I don't particularly like Susan as a companion, at least not on the TV stuff. And I know Carol Ann Ford went on to do a lot of stuff for Doctor Who post her departure from the show. But this episode, the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which is Susan's official final episode of the show as a companion before she came back for later other episodes. It's one of the sadder moments of that era of Doctor Who when the Doctor has to begrudgingly leave Susan behind with this man right there, David Campbell. And it's an episode that really shows the character growth that this child had. She went from being a sort of annoying, whiny character in her first season to a much more confident and a much more confident woman that can stand on her own to legs. So I would highly recommend watching that episode for lots of reasons, but mainly for Susan and for the purposes of this episode today. Another episode I would like to highlight is The Rescue, which is the episode that introduces Vicky Palmister as the next companion, the sort of replacement to Susan. It's an episode that it's an episode about. It's a little hard to talk about this episode without spoiling it too much. So I'll just say, just watch this episode. It's a two-parter, so it shouldn't take too long to get through. However, there is much more to say about this episode, The Romans. Long story short, as you can see here, or rather guess from this image, the Doctor and friends land in ancient Rome during the time of Caesar Nero, and the Doctor and Vicky decide to go visit Rome, while Ian and Barbara decide to stay behind. Obviously, they get separated, and again, without spoiling too much, but the Doctor and Vicky have a completely separate adventure from Ian and Barbara, which very rarely intertwines. There are certain moments where you think that the Doctor is going to run into one of his other companions at some point or another, but that just never happens. And again, it's the best I can say without spoiling. But it's a great way to showcase how you can tell two completely separate stories without having the characters meet or interact with one another throughout the majority of the story. So it's a really interesting perspective on a Doctor Who episode. This is something that I wish more Doctor Who episodes would do today. The Hartnell episode, the Hartnell era of the show. One of the main reasons I love it so much is because they were able to take risks, and they did certain gimmick episodes, some of which are even on this list today, but they did a lot of gimmicky stuff that a lot of other shows weren't doing at the time. And it kind of went away with the following Doctor's era, and it's something that very rarely we see Doctor Who episodes do today, at least to the level that they did do it during that time. But anyways, back to the episodes themselves. Sadly, I couldn't quite figure out a good episode that really showcases Stephen Taylor as the companion. Side note, I'm not really the biggest fan of Stephen Taylor as a companion. To me, he was always just the poor man's Ian Chesterton, just a pale imitation, a unsuccessful copy, one would argue, of Ian Chesterton. He didn't have his brains, he didn't have his bronze, he didn't have his looks. But he was just a replacement for him. But I was able to scrap up this episode, the Daleks' Master Plan, one of the greatest episodes. One of the greatest stories of Doctor Who of all time, and a great showcase for not one and not two, but three companions of the Doctor. One could make an argument for a fourth one, but that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, so Stephen does do some really interesting stuff in this episode, but for the most part, it's mainly Katarina, the one-off companion, and Sarah Kingdom, which we see here in this picture, another one-off companion who really get their chance to shine. And with this episode being with this story being 13 episodes long, there's plenty of time for even those two quote-unquote one-off companions to show off why they are the best, or rather one of the best Hartnell era companions. Another companion I'm not really a big fan of is Dodo Chaplet or Dorothea Chaplet, but an episode that I really, really like from the Hartnell era is, technically speaking, her first episode, not her debut episode, but technically her first story as a companion, The Ark. And it's an episode, I think I mentioned this also in last month's episode, where I talked about how it's an episode that really shows you the dangers of time travel, and how something that you do in one particular period of time can have devastating consequences years and sometimes centuries later in the future. And without spoiling too much, it's something that Dodo Chaplet was involved with. Again, no spoilers. Let's move on. Dodo Chaplet's final story as a companion is really more of a showcase for the next two companions of the Doctor, Ben Jackson and Polly Wright. but Dodo actually has a pretty major part to play in this episode as well. It's called The War Machines. Great acting, I would say, from Jackie Lane, who played Dodo Chaplet, and the beginning of what would eventually become a very tragic story for this character off camera, and by that I mean novels and other Doctor Who supplemental material. But yeah, this episode is more of a showcase for Ben Jackson and Paulie Wright, or as I prefer to call them, Ben and Paulie. Just Ben and Paulie, they are pretty much inseparable as companions. They're kind of like Ian and Barbara, a little bit like Amy and Rory. They're a package deal, in my opinion. That's why in the companions T ranking list that I mentioned we did last year, we counted them both as one companion because you can't really have one without the other. But this episode really sets up a great introduction for both of them and some great moments for both of them teaming up with the Doctor, and an interesting way that they both became companions. Again, without spoiling. But another great showcase of both of their talents is the as William Hartnell's final episode, The 10th Planet. Now, through a mixture of some real world behind the scenes stuff and some actual story plot elements, William Hartnell's Doctor didn't really get much to do in this episode, especially towards the later half of the story. So it was mostly just Ben and Polly doing the heavy lifting with regards to the story stuff. We get to see a lot of interesting skills from both of them, and this scene right here that we see in this image of just Polly standing up to a Cyberman, showing how brave she really is, and showing how the strength of character that she can exhibit in her time with the Doctor is just superb, in my opinion. So I would highly recommend watching this episode for a multitude of reasons. But given the fact that we are specifically discussing companions today on this show, these two companions have a great showing in this episode, nonetheless. Not necessarily. Sorry, hold on. Yep, StreamYard did it again. We're missing one, so I'll fix that in just a minute. But yes, so the next one I'm going to be talking about is the Underwater Menace. It's an episode that I really enjoy. One of my personal favorite Patrick Troughton era episodes, and it's an episode that really showcases the idea that, or rather, that particular era of the Troughton era Doctor really showcases how the Doctor traveling with a group of 3 companions can work. And in my opinion, the Doctor, Jamie, Ben, and Polly is the best ever example of the Doctor having 3 companions at the same time. Obviously, a lot of other doctors, or rather showrunners, I should say, tried to replicate that success. I don't think it worked. Not with the Tom Baker era, and certainly not with the Jodie Whittaker era. But the Doctor having 3 companions at the same time is something that can actually work, and work great. But it's all just a matter of how you are able to balance it out. So yeah. Again, I said that mainly just to avoid spoilers for this episode, but it's a great Atlantis episode. It's a great showcase for Jamie, Ben, and Polly individually, but also together as a group. Another good episode that really showcases an excellent use of all 3 of these companions individually and together is The Faceless Ones, Ben and Polly's official final episode of this on the show. So yeah, The Faceless Ones, again, one of my personal favorite Troughton era episodes. I regret to say that with the Troughton era is a specific era where I think I much prefer the episodes themselves to the actual Doctor. In my tier ranking list for the Doctors, I definitely put Patrick Troughton towards the bottom of the list of one of my favorite official Doctors. So, but like I said, it's an era of Doctor Who where I prefer the episodes to the Doctor, which doesn't really happen a lot. A lot of the times, I find myself liking the Doctor him or herself, but not necessarily the episodes they happen to be in. So it's a weird contrast there. But yeah, the Faceless Ones. It's a really good episode. You should watch it. Sadly, I couldn't quite find an episode that really showcases the talents and the uniqueness of Victoria Waterfield. Personally, she's not one of the better companions, especially in the Patrick Troughton era, which is saying something. But this episode that I was able to salvage here, the Tomb of the Cybermen, and well, actually, salvage is the funny choice of words because that episode was believed to be missing for a very long time before it was found completely intact in its entirety. So now it can entirely be viewed in its entirety. But this moment right here is, I believe, when Victoria walks into the TARDIS for the very first time. So a little bit of a minor spoiler, but by the end of Patrick Troughton's first season, the final episode, The Evil of the Daleks, is when Victoria officially decides to become a companion of the Doctor, but she does not walk inside the TARDIS until the first episode of the immediate following season, The Tomb of the Cybermen, which, in my opinion, is one of the best Cybermen episodes and some of the best moments in the Troughton era happened in this episode, which I believe is 7 parts, I think. But a lot of really great moments between the Doctor and Victoria happen in this episode specifically. The next episode I would like to highlight is The Web of Fear. I would argue it's another good showcase for Victoria as a companion and Jamie, but for the most part, this episode is the introduction of Colonel Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, which would later was promoted to the rank of brigadier, and specifically the John Pertwee era. But yeah, this episode introduces the Brigadier to the Doctor Who universe, and this episode really does not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. It's an episode focusing mainly on the Great Intelligence, which has then gone on to become a much bigger threat during the Matt Smith era of the show. But this episode is is sort of can be seen as a prequel and a sequel to the episode The Snowman. It's kind of weird discussing it in this context, but when you see both episodes, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's both a prequel and a sequel to an episode that came out 40-something years later. Another companion that I sadly, from the Hartnell era, that I'm not a big fan of is Zoe. But this episode right here, the Mind Robber, I believe I said this last time, or rather the last week, last month I should say, when I talked about all the episode recommendations that I had. This is an episode where, in my opinion, it could easily work today. It could easily, obviously, if you update the graphics and adjust the storyline a little bit, this episode can definitely work today. And Zoe Harriet, the companion of the second Doctor, shows off some really interesting, neat skills in this episode that, curiously, she never really actually displays again. But that's a story for another time. But yeah, it's also a great story for Jamie. I don't think we even talked about Jamie. Jamie's, in my opinion, the best second Doctor companion, and he has so many great moments in in the Tomb of the Cybermen, in his debut episode, The Highlanders, in the Underwater Menace. But there's a lot of interesting stuff happening with Jamie in this episode specifically. I believe the immediate follow-up episode, The Invasion, also is a great episode for Jamie and Zoe. But for the most part, it's mainly known for bringing the return of the Brigadier. And this is where the Brigadier became the Brigadier, obviously. But this is the episode that solidified him as one of the best companions in Doctor Who ever, period, end of sentence. And also, I believe right there, right underneath the Doctor there, I believe that's Corporal, which was later promoted to Sergeant, John Benton, which went on to become a much bigger character during the John Pertwee era. And it's a great Cybermen adventure also. I really hope I didn't spoil the fact that there are Cybermen in this episode because it's kind of a secret. But anyways, too late for that now. Now, the Crotons is one of my personal favorite episodes. The Crotons themselves, just the design, the goofiness of the design, is one of my personal favorite aspects of them, and how they operate is something that I really, really like. The Crotons is one of my favorite Patrick Troughton era episodes, and it actually does showcase a lot of great moments for a companion that I'm not really a big fan of, Zoe Harriet. She displays a lot of skill and strength of character in this episode that I think is definitely worth a watch if you're a fan of Zoe Harriet. So if you want to rewatch one of her best, that's an episode I would recommend. An episode that I think is kind of mandatory for when talking about the Second Doctor, his final episode, The War Games. This episode is massive. It's 10 episodes long, and the Doctor gets separated from his companions multiple times and reunites them multiple times. And it also has one of the saddest endings for any companions ever, where obviously by the final episode, the Doctor is found by the Time Lords and put on trial and exiled to Earth. But unfortunately, his two companions, Jamie McCrimmon and Zoe Harriet, have their minds wiped and sent back to their original points in time, as if nothing had ever happened, so they never really remember the Doctor. And it's still, to this day, in my opinion, one of the worst things that happened to any companion ever. Not the worst, obviously, because you could argue Donna's fate and Clara's fate and Bill's fate, and hell, even Adric's fate was far worse. And I mean, holy crap, Sarah Kingdom, we just talked about her. Sarah Kingdom's fate was far worse than this, but it's one of the worst things ever to happen to a companion in the show's long history. Moving on, we have Spearhead from Space. Now, obviously, John Pertwee's first season only had 4 stories, and the main companion there, Liz Shaw, or rather Elizabeth Shaw, her time with the Doctor was sadly very brief. She was then replaced by Jo Grant. More on her later. But being able to find good highlight episodes for Liz Shaw from this season, without just straight up having all 4 of them in this video, was very challenging. But I believe I was able to find 2 episodes that really showcase her talents in the best way possible. Spearhead from Space, where she begins as a skeptical woman of science that doesn't really believe a lot of the stuff that the Doctor is claiming. First of all, she doesn't even believe he's an alien. That's for starters. But she becomes a great close friend to the Doctor much later on. And another great episode, not just for her, but just all the other John Pertwee era companions from that time, including the Brigadier and John Benton, just unit as a whole, is Inferno. Right here we can see, this is bit of minor spoiler, this is an alternate universe episode, a parallel universe, I should say, for the Doctor, where I believe the format itself is pretty self-explanatory. The Doctor travels to an alternate universe where everyone he knows are the bad guys, for lack of a better word. So right here you can see Nicholas Courtney as Lethbridge Stewart, not as the Brigadier. This time he's the brigade leader, Lethbridge Stewart, with the eye patch, and right there, the woman right next, right in between him and John Pertwee's Doctor, that's Liz Shaw with a completely different hairdo. And yeah, like I said, it's basically the Doctor's friends as the bad guys, for lack of a better word. It's one of the best Doctor Who John Pertwee episodes. It's a great parallel Earth episode, and it's a great episode that showcases the Doctor's companions as different people. Yeah, it's one of my personal favorites. Now, I'm a little bit struggling with regards to if I would consider Jo Grant the best third Doctor companion, because you all know I have a very, very, very soft spot for Sara Jane Smith. She's my personal favorite companion of all time, and I argued and really put my foot down that she should have remained at the very top of the S tier last year when we did the companions ranking episode. But her and Joe Grant, two of my personal favorite companions, but I sometimes struggle deciding whether or not Joe is the better Third Doctor companion or is it Sara Jane. I would argue that Sara Jane is the best companion overall, but Joe Grant, I think she's the best Jon Pertwee companion, mainly because she was there the longer. She was there the longest. She did, I believe, 3 seasons with the Doctor, and obviously she came back for the wedding of Sara Jane Smith, and Sara Jane did only 1 season with Jon Pertwee and 2.5 with Tom Baker. So that's why I sometimes say that Sara Jane is my favorite companion, or sorry, the best companion, but Joe Grant is the best Third Doctor companion. And this episode, her debut episode, Terror of the Autons, also a great episode that really showcases this guy that we talked about him earlier in this very same episode. It was the debut of the Master, another great episode for the Autons, and just a great Doctor companion relationship. Now, obviously, the relationship between the Third Doctor and Joe Grant was pretty rocky from the start, but they really grew closer together as the season went on, and they became really, really great friends by the end of it, to the point where her departure from the show, which we slightly talked about last week, is, in my opinion, one of the saddest departures, not fates, but one of the saddest departures for a companion on the show. And in my opinion, one of the best final scenes in any Doctor Who season ever. But we were not here to talk about that episode just yet. Another great episode for both of them is The Demons or The Diamonds. It all depends on your pronunciation, how you choose to say it. It's a great episode that not only showcases the Doctor's relationship with Joe Grant, it's also a great episode for John Benton, the Brigadier, Mike Yates, and it's a great episode that really showcases one of my favorite parts about the Jon Pertwee era is how, well, obviously, no surprise there, the Doctor was on exile. He was not allowed to leave planet Earth for a very long time, comparatively speaking, but he made lots of relationships with friends on Earth during that time, and the relationships between the individual friends / companions at the time, the relationship between Joe Grant and Mike Yates and John Benton and the Brigadier and Mike Yates, Brigadier and Joe Grant, any other variation of that, one of my favorite parts about the Jon Pertwee era, and this episode, in my opinion, is the best example of that. Another great episode is The Curse of Peladon. Peladon, in and of itself, a planet I wish they bring back in Doctor Who at some capacity. We had the return of Alpha Centauri relatively recently in the Peter Capaldi episode, The Empress of Mars. They even brought back the actress from that episode. But it's a great episode for Joe Grant as a companion. And also it features Patrick Troughton's son, David Troughton, as King Peladon of Peladon in this episode. Moving on to Sara Jane Smith, her debut episode, The Time Warrior, one of my personal favorite debuts for a companion, and it's a great episode that introduces the Sontarans. The Sontaran that we see here, Commander Lynx, a great introduction to this race. It's a great introduction to a villain, one of the best Sontarans, in my opinion, in the show overall. And just a great, another great, good episode that showcases the dangers of time travel. And I'm sorry to say this, but I will harp on this till the day I die, I think. Look at this pic. Sorry, my voice cracked for a second there. Look at this picture right here. Okay, look at Commander Lynx standing next to Sara Jane and the Doctor. Jon Pertwee, relatively tall person. And we can see that the Sontaran right here, Commander Lynx, almost matches his height. So I will never understand what was the decision to make the Sontarans these diminutive, dwarfish characters in the modern era of the show, which sad to say is I think it's still a problem with the Sontarans today. But back in the day, the Sontarans were massive and muscular, and they were intimidating, and they weren't played for laughs as much. So while I love Strax is one of my personal favorite characters from the Stephen Moffat era, which is saying something in and of itself. But just why? Why would you make these people look like this? Anyways, moving on. We have John Pertwee's final episode, Planet of the Spiders. It's a great episode for Sara Jane. Relatively good episode for the Brigadier, but for the most part, it's a really, really good episode for Mike Yates, a character that has, again, without spoiling too much, he fell out of favor with UNIT during the John Pertwee era, especially during the final season of John Pertwee, and this was a great redemption episode for him. Now on to the Fourth Doctor, again, a Sontaran, being much taller than Sara Jane. I'm not gonna harp on it again too much, but this episode actually is a good showcase for a companion that I do not like at all, Harry Sullivan, the companion that is best associated with the line, "Harry Sullivan is an imbecile!" A famous line from the Fourth Doctor. Harry actually does some good stuff in this episode, and it's a really good episode for Sara Jane as well. The Genesis of the Daleks is another one of those episodes where the Doctor gets separated from his companions, and they have interesting adventures individually and with each other, separate from the Doctor. It's one of the best Doctor Who episodes of all time, easily the best Dalek episode, easily the best Davros episode, but it's a great showcase for the Doctor's companions in and of itself. Sara Jane's final episode, The Hand of Fear. The episode itself is okay, I would say, but the ending there, when Sara Jane says goodbye to the Doctor, still, in my opinion, one of the most emotional moments from the show, and it really does set up a lot for the character of Sara Jane in the future. And again, I'll harp on this for as long as people are willing to listen. Sara Jane is the best companion in Doctor Who ever. Just period, end of sentence. And this episode not only sets up a lot of stuff for her character in the future, a future where even the showrunners had no idea was even going to happen, but yeah, there really is no other way to say this. Just Sara Jane is the best companion. I'm sorry if I'm not really making sense too much, but yeah, she's my favorite companion, and this episode is a great showcase for that. And she goes through hell and back in this episode specifically. One of the main reasons why she decides to leave, obviously not the main reason, but it's one of the main reasons why she leaves the Doctor. But yeah, also Eldred must live. Just wanted to point that out. Leela's debut episode, The Face of Evil. One of my, again, I just said quite too much, I would say, that Sara Jane is my favorite companion. Leela is actually pretty up there as well. Leela, and it's not just because of her looks, it's not because of the way she dresses, it's because she legitimately is one of the best companions in Doctor Who ever. And this episode is a great showcase to that. Obviously, it's her debut, but it also showcases her talents as a companion, especially of the Fourth Doctor. And sorry, I lost my place for a second there. Another great episode that really showcases how important the character of Leela is also the episode The Invisible Enemy. And it's a great showcase for the Doctor, a great showcase for Leela and the Doctor together, and it also is the debut episode of K9, one of everyone's favorite lovable mechanical companion. And if I'm being quite honest, no surprise there, the best mechanical companion the Doctor has ever had. Not that there's much competition, but still. The Sunmakers, another really good episode for Leela and K9 separately and together. But yeah, an episode that gets a little bit too much hate in my opinion, but I still like it. it's a very relevant episode to today. As a matter of fact, some would argue it's a very preachy episode, but I love it. And like I said, it's a very relevant episode to today's standard. The Reboss Operation, the episode that features the debut of Romana's first incarnation, and just the whole season of the quest for the key to time is, in my opinion, some might argue against it, but it's, in my opinion, one of the best seasons in Doctor Who ever. It's basically the Infinity Gauntlet storyline from the comics, just done way before that, and in the world of Doctor Who. And it's a great showcase and introduction of Romana as a character. And another really good episode for Romana is the Androids of Terra. It's an episode where, in my opinion, the Doctor kind of takes a bit of a back seat, and it's mainly an episode that focuses on Romana as a character. And the main reason I'm not talking too much about this episode is because there's a bit of a spoilery plot point that's kind of major to the character of Romana in this episode that I would much rather people would watch it for themselves rather than me having me telling them about it. City of Death, still to this day, the most viewed episode of Doctor Who ever, of all time, at least the final part of it, that is. But it's a lot of people's favorite episode. It's one of the great moments for the Doctor, and it's really an episode that really focuses on how different Romana's second incarnation is from her first incarnation. Her first incarnation was much more strict and serious. This one's much more laid back and comedic, but without sacrificing Romana's incredible intelligence and self-awareness. So like I said, another great episode that showcases her talents. There's a reason why I decided to put the episode Shada on this list. Very famously, it's an unfinished episode that never actually made it to air originally. You can find certain versions of this episode with Tom Baker just narrating the moments that that wasn't really filmed. They made a remake version of this episode featuring the Eighth Doctor, with Romana coming back, or rather taking a bit of a break from being the president of Gallifrey at the time, which is what she was during most of the Eighth Doctor's era and most of the Time War era. But they basically just they came back to relive the events of this episode, and obviously then this episode was then completely remade again, mostly in animated form, so that people can actually be able to watch this episode in its entirety. But yeah, there's a reason why that's mainly the reason why I decided to keep this episode here. Now, this next one is somewhat of a trilogy of episodes, starting with The Keeper of Traken. It's a great introduction for Nyssa as a companion, and in my opinion, it's an episode that really highlights the Fourth Doctor's relationship with Adric. Now, Adric is far from being anyone's favorite companion overall. He does go out like a hero, bit pointless in my opinion, but he does go out like a hero. But Adric, not anyone's favorite companion ever. One of the least favorite companions for a lot of people. But in my opinion, Adric really, really worked best when he was with the Fourth Doctor than he was with the Fifth Doctor. And you'll see what I mean if you actually watch that particular character's development in the show. The immediate follow-up episode is Logopolis, which also introduces the character of Tegan, and it's the episode that sort of makes Nyssa and Tegan official companions of the Doctor. Again, it showcases another one of those, like I said, the relationships between Adric and the Fourth Doctor, which I think was the best version of that relationship, that companion Doctor relationship. But it's a great showcase for Nyssa and Tegan as well. And another great showcase for Nyssa and Tegan specifically together, which really kind of fueled a lot of rumors, or rather speculations from people, that they were actually in love with each other, and I believe in the webcast released at the end of 2020, Farewell Sara Jane Smith, which is basically it's Sara Jane's funeral, but in that webcast, it is heavily implied that Tegan and Nyssa are a couple in the Doctor Who universe. And this episode really does showcase their relationship together as companions. And really, because it's our generation episode for the Fifth Doctor, or the Doctor, for the most part, kind of takes a back seat. And Nyssa and Tegan are the ones doing most of the heavy lifting as far as the story goes. And, well, I would say heavy lifting figuratively and literally in this episode, and you'll see why when you'll watch this episode. But yeah, this is the final episode of the trilogy that I mentioned of the Keeper of Kraken, Logopolis, and Castrovalva. I forgot to mention the end of the episode, the name of the episode. I apologize. Another really, really good episode for Nyssa, specifically Black Orchid, and in my personal opinion, best Fifth Doctor episode that isn't the 20th anniversary special. It's a truly unique adventure, and I believe this week, as of the recording of this video, it's celebrated its 40th anniversary since going on the air. So that's something interesting. But yeah, Black Orchid, a truly, really unique episode for Doctor Who that for once there is no alien monster sci-fi story. It's a truly unique story, a human story, I should say, that just happens to have the Doctor in it. It's a unique human story that just happens to have 3 aliens and a human woman there. Now, a really good showcase for Tegan as a companion is some would say it's a two-parter. It's a little harder for me to call it a two-parter because both episodes of the story are in 2 completely separate seasons. But Kinda, which is not the picture you see here, this is actually a picture from the episode Snake Dance, which is kind of the follow-up to that one. But it showcases Tegan's relationship with the mythical creature known as the Mara. It's also a good episode for Nyssa, a showcase of how Nyssa developed psychic abilities late towards her run with the Fifth Doctor. Now, sadly, a lot of Nyssa's psychic abilities weren't really explored the best way on the show. They were much more expanded upon in supplementary material like novels and Big Finish episodes. But this episode, I believe, is the best showcase for Nyssa's talents, and a great episode for Tegan, and in my opinion, one of the scariest and darkest episodes of the Fifth Doctor era. Don't let this rubberly low budget, cheap looking prop behind Tegan fool you. It's one of the darkest episodes of the era. Enlightenment, in my opinion, is another great episode. It's a good episode for Turlo, the new companion for the Fifth Doctor. My personal least favorite companion for the Fifth. Well, my second least favorite companion for the Fifth Doctor. It's a great episode for him, and it's also a really good episode for Tegan. Minor spoiler alert: Tegan kind of falls in love in this episode, but it's a sort of a forbidden love, I should say. That's really all I can say without spoiling too much. But yeah, Enlightenment. Actually, I think Enlightenment might be my favorite episode of the Fifth Doctor era. Not so much Black Orchid, but I don't know. I have to watch both of these episodes again, see how they stack up to me, on my rankings nowadays. But obviously, I can't really talk about the Fifth Doctor without bringing up the 5 Doctors, the 20th anniversary special, an episode that features a whole host and a who's who of companions. In this picture alone, we see Sara Jane Smith, Susan, and the Brigadier. Obviously, we see the first, second, fourth, third, and Fifth Doctor. Not necessarily in that order, but yeah, and also how could I forget K9? Yeah, K9 doesn't really do much in this episode, unfortunately, but he's in this picture. So yeah, it's K9. But this episode also showcases the return of Jamie and Zoe and Liz and Mike Yates. It's a major return for a lot of Doctor Who characters in for the 20th anniversary special. In fact, the 10th Doctor himself, David Tennant, in an interview once compared this episode itself to Avengers Endgame, which I think it's kind of funny considering one of my favorite, well, actually my favorite David Tennant episode is what I consider to be basically Doctor Who's version of Avengers Infinity War. But, I mean, the comparisons can go on forever as we look at this picture of all these great actors and actresses from Doctor Who standing next to the wax dummy of Tom Baker from the Wax Museum. Oops, I didn't anticipate this picture to be this narrow, but yeah, Tegan's final episode on the show, officially, Resurrection of the Daleks. It's an episode that really showcases, or rather, sort of a precursor to the show getting canceled, I should say. This episode really shows how darker the episodes of Doctor Who have become over time, over the 20-year period of Doctor Who. And the reason why Tegan leaves the Doctor in this episode is a great showcase to that. It's not the fact that she leaves, it's the reason why she leaves. Again, without spoiling too much, but it's one of the best, one of the darker episodes of Doctor Who. I mean, this episode is all about the Daleks, so you would imagine it's darker than most other episodes. Next is Planet of Fire. Again, I mentioned earlier Turlough, or Vislor Turlough, since we now get to learn his full name in this episode. Turlough is not one of my personal favorite companions of the Fifth Doctor, but in this episode we get to see him. We learn more about his character and his backstory, and this character is much more well explored in further detail than ever before. And I would say it's one of the better episodes for Turlough in this on the show. Also, my least favorite my least favorite Fifth Doctor companion, Chameleon, also has a few moments to shine in this episode. And obviously, Chameleon is a companion that we only really get to see him for 2 episodes because the stupid prop never worked. So they had to very rushly write him out of the show. He only appeared in 2 episodes, his debut episode and his final episode. But there's some great stuff with Chameleon, which isn't something you hear me say often, in this episode. And it's also a great introduction for Perry Brown, the last Fifth Doctor companion. Well, actually, we'll discuss more on that once we get to a later episode this month. But another episode with Perry is Vengeance on Varus. Some people would consider this one of the better episodes of the Colin Baker era, which, again, there isn't much competition because a lot of the televised Colin Baker episodes are not the best, or at least not considered the best by a lot of people. But a lot of really bad, terrible stuff happened to Perry in this episode, and she somehow manages to overcome them. And this is one of the main reasons why I think Perry does not get the appreciation she deserves as a companion, because she goes through a lot of really bad stuff during her time, especially with the Fifth Doctor, and she overcomes all of those hardships, and she still manages to carry herself as a strong, independent woman, and especially the way her character ends, and especially even more where we now know her character ended up in the more recent trailer for season 22, I believe. The trailer for that, the main trailer that features the return of Nicola Brandt to play this character in live action again. So yeah, a great showcase for Perry Brown, this episode, Vengeance on Varus. Another good showcase of both Perry and Jamie is the 2 Doctors. Obviously, Patrick Troughton returning for another final last hurrah as the second Doctor, alongside his signature companion Jamie McCrimmon. And there's some great moments between the Sixth Doctor and Jamie, ironically, and a lot of really good moments between Jamie and Perry, two companions from two completely separate Doctors. So, and also Sontarans, because we all love seeing the Sontarans back in Doctor Who. Um, the Ultimate Foe, which is the final episode of the Trial of a Time Lord series, which is Colin Baker's final season. And as a matter of fact, The Ultimate Foe is Colin Baker's last episode as the Doctor, officially, on television, that is. Really good showcase of Sabalom Glitz, which isn't really considered an official companion, but I would say he's a sort of pseudo-companion of the 6th and 7th Doctors, per se. But Melanie Bush is there too, I suppose. An episode that I love from the 7th Doctor era that I don't think a lot of people do, but I'm fine if I just have to be alone in my opinions on this episode, but it's Paradise Towers. Again, Melanie Bush, not really one of my personal favorite companions, at least not on camera. In Big Finish, I think I like her better, but not one of my favorite on-camera companions, but she has really interesting stuff to do in this episode, Paradise Towers. And another episode that I decided to keep off the list, Delta and the Bannermen, which is considered one of the most hated episodes of Doctor Who ever. I like it, but not a lot of other people do. But yeah, Melanie Bush, really good companion in this episode, and Delta and the Bannerman, which I'm not going to show off in this list today. Battlefield, not really one of my personal favorite 7th Doctor episodes, but it does showcase the return of the Brigadier for, technically speaking, Nicholas Courtney's final appearance in Doctor Who television. It's a very complicated thing to say, but yeah, the character of the Brigadier sort of made an appearance as a Cyberman during Capaldi's first season finale, and obviously his legacy is mainly maintained by Kate Stewart, and Nicholas Courtney has played the Brigadier in Big Finish stuff, and his final appearance as the Brigadier was, or rather on television that is, was in the Sara Jane Adventures, but this is the final time the Brigadier was shown on camera, in live action, in Doctor Who. It's a very complicated thing, but we got there in the end. I'm pretty sure I might have messed up the order there for a second, but yeah. Remembrance of the Daleks, the episode where some people would arguably trace this episode all the way back to the origin of the Time War. More on that when we actually get to do an episode talking about the Time War itself, but one of the best episodes for a Doctor Who companion, specifically Ace, right? This character right here, she destroys an entire Dalek with a baseball bat. She beats a Dalek to pieces with a baseball bat, which just shows you how great of a companion she really is. And it's a really good Dalek story regardless, and a really good Davros story, which I guess you could argue Davros is sort of a companion of the Doctor in a way. An episode that I really do not like, but is considered one of the best episodes of Doctor Who ever, what considered easily by a lot of people to be Sylvester McCoy's best episode, Ghostlight, and it is arguably also considered to be Ace's best on-screen story ever. We see Ace like never before, scared. She's usually a brave, confident woman, but we see her terrified at times during this episode. Are really just a breakdown of her character, and the main reason why Ace is sort of the prototype for a lot of the modern companions we see in modern Doctor Who today. Like she's a prototype for Rose and Martha and Donna, the Pawns, Clara, and any other modern era companion that we see today. This episode is the biggest exploration of a companion's backstory that we ever saw in Doctor Who. And the showrunners did not stop there, because the immediate follow-up episode, The Curse of Fenric, is another great exploration for this character's backstory. And I cannot really say why that is, because it's a major spoiler in the episode. But during the episode itself, certain things happen between the Doctor and Ace that really shake up the relationship a lot. And it's something that you're not really used to seeing the Doctor doing, especially not to a companion character, even in the modern era of the show today. So, yeah, it's, again, hard to say without spoiling too much. Just all I'll say is watch the episode and you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. Or just, watch all of Classic Who, because it's great. It's good. It's really good. Anyways, somehow I managed to talk about all 51 of these episodes without losing too much of a step. As you can hear, my voice is starting to crack up. But yeah, these are all the episodes that I think best exemplify the Doctor-companion relationship, best showcase of companions in general, and just a really good showcase of companions interacting with one another on this show. And I don't necessarily love or even like some of the episodes on today's list, but I think even regardless of my opinions on the episodes themselves, regardless of my opinions on the companions themselves, I think I did a pretty good job showing you a good representation of these companions, and how vital the companion character in and of itself, or rather the concept of companions, is to a show like Doctor Who. Doctor Who, I think Raiko said this last week, there are two things that really make Doctor Who what it is, one of which is the TARDIS and the other one is regeneration. I would argue against that. I would argue that there are many factors that make Doctor Who what it is. Obviously, the Doctor being one of them. The TARDIS obviously is another one. The regeneration aspect of it is another one. But another thing that I think is a major important part in Doctor Who, and one of the many things that make Doctor Who what it is the companions. And there have been episodes of Doctor Who where the Doctor traveled alone without a companion, which are great in and of themselves, but the necessity to have a companion is one of the major parts about this show. One of the main reasons we love this show. Most of the companions, especially the ones I showed today, are humans. And it's our way of looking at ourselves as characters in this universe. They're basically, the companion character is a representation of us, the viewers. How would we have interacted with the Doctor or with all the crazy, magnificent things that are shown in this show? Now, obviously, the companion characters got a big overhaul in the modern era of the season of the show. The companions got way different. The modern era companions, I should say, got much different from the classic era companions. Much more complex characters in and of themselves. But that is a story for another time. I will be discussing that in the next episode of Our Greatest Show in the Galaxy. And this episode, I really enjoyed this episode. This episode was just flew by. I barely even noticed the passage of time, which is great. I love it when I do that. So yeah, so I will that is what I will leave you off with today. So yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, if you have your own opinions on the episodes I showed off today, if you have your own suggestions of episodes that feature Doctor Who's companions in a way that I felt like I missed on my list, feel free to drop it in the comments. Let me know in the comment section, or rather the comments of this video, what your favorite companions are, which episodes you think represent those companions the best, And just like I said, go and watch our T ranking list, the 4-hour T ranking list of companions that we did last year. I had a lot of fun doing that, regardless of the 4 hours aspect of it. If you really enjoyed hearing me talk about Doctor Who, I talk about a lot of other stuff other than Doctor Who on my own YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek. I'm occasionally on Twitch, trying, emphasis on trying, to finish Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I really enjoyed the the announcement trailer for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet that we got this week or last week, from the point of view of you watching this. But yeah, hopefully I can finish that game and Legends Arceus on Twitch before Scarlet and Violet come out. I'm also on other shows on this channel. I'm also on Northern Countdown with Soda and Ben. By the time you're watching this, I already have been on the most recent, or rather I should say final episode of Let's Talk About Star Wars, the Alien Game Championship. Rather, the last episode on this channel for Let's Talk About Star Wars, I wrote some of the questions for the Alien Game Championship, and if all goes well, I'm assuming I've also co-hosted alongside Marie Wilson, the new host for the show going forward. We also have Schmodown Analytics and Mount Schmodown on this very same channel. That's our main Schmodown content for this channel going forward. We have You Seen This with Daniel and Snark and sometimes Dave on this show, on this channel. And we also have Rewind the Tape with Soda and Ben, sometimes with a guest, where they're in the last stages of recapping all the Batman movies in preparation for The Batman, which I'm assuming has already been released this past weekend. So these are all the shows I can remember we have on this channel, the Northern Entertainment Group YouTube channel. Please consider subscribing to us and leaving a like and a comment on our videos. It will mean the world to us if you do. And, well, that's really all I have to say for now. I will leave you with that. So until next episode, hopefully my voice can hold up better next week than this week. But until then, everybody, take a jelly baby and go back inside the TARDIS. Goodbye.